Good late morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Ralph. I'm going to run through a bunch of things. I mean, what we're talking about is fact-based fundraising, and this is a funder's take on that, and it's partially about our new proposal and reporting processes at McKnight. But basically, I'm going to start off with a simple fact, some observations, and then an intersection that happened at McKnight that resulted in us making a lot of changes having to do with our proposal, reporting, and evaluation structures. Okay, so I'm going to kind of roll through this, and then we'll hopefully have a lot of time. Not hopefully, we will have a lot of time for questions. But you know, life is kind of one of these, you prepare for something, but then something else happens. And so I'm wanting to talk about all of this stuff, but I had this conversation with one of my teenage daughters at about midnight last night. And it was one of these great conversations, and the result of which, I feel like I don't know anything. So that's where I am just as a person, just letting you know that. But now I'm going to be, as a professional from the McKnight Foundation, vice president and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, I want to start off with a simple fact, a real simple fact. And this is, I like to keep things practical and simple and pragmatic, because I think we tend in our business in a lot of places to overcomplicate things. But because of the times, the economic times, the political times, the social times, because of all of these pressures, now more than ever, foundations and grant makers, giving programs, they all want to understand the impact of their investments. Okay? But you do too. I mean, so it's not like just foundations and giving programs want to know the impact of this. You as nonprofits who are doing work out in the world, you want to know what the impact of what you're doing is too. And you simply want to know, what we both simply want to know is whether or not what you're doing and we're doing with you is accomplishing what we want. I mean, it's a very simple thing. That's what it all is about. The problem is from there, it gets very messy, and it can get very complex. And when you start talking about indicators or reporting or evaluation frameworks, it can get noisy, it can get hijacked by jargon. There are tons of approaches that everybody has. You have cutting-edge evaluation theory, and then you have highly academic evaluation frameworks with control groups. And you can be working with foundations who are, hiring professional staff, who have professional staff, who are working in one context of evaluation or in another. And just like the whole problem when you're fundraising and trying to figure out what foundations want and what you need to tell them, the urge for people to have greater information and know more about outcomes and know more about impact is creating a lot of cacophony and confusion in the field. So, a few observations. I might say a few things that are heretical, and please forgive me for that. But I just like talking really frankly. But there's a secret. I don't know if it's a dark, dirty secret, but I think it's a secret that everybody in the foundation world, wants evaluations, wants indicators, wants all of this information, but frankly, a lot of folks don't really know what to do with them when they got them. And that becomes a problem, because it's more work for you, it's more work for us, and there's generally a lot of confusion. There's also a false belief in causality that, particularly in our line of work, which is broadly social change, world change, trying to make things happen against a lot of odds. Cause and effect is not real clear. It's not simple math. It's not like we do this, and this happened. We can count kids in programs. We can count, people going through things. But the real impact that we're looking for is not just numbers. The impact is in changes in people's lives. How do you capture that? You know, I mean, that's not an easy thing to capture. But when we get into this world where we're trying to talk a lot about, you know, specific outcomes and this and that, there's a pressure to act like there's a belief in causality. And I, for one, and this is one thing we talk about internally, is that's a false belief. It's a lot more complex than that. The other observation that I just want to make is that most programs, most giving programs and most nonprofit programs, yours and ours, are always in a development mode. We're always learning, we're always adapting, we're always adjusting. Sometimes it's to changes in the field or to the clients or the people that we're working. Sometimes it's because of financial pressures, funders change things change with government. So there's always this constant shifting of what we're doing and how we're trying to have impact. So that makes it additionally complex. Okay? So those are just some observations. So I want to talk about the intersection of two things in our shop. One was the advent of online grant making for us, and the other is some learnings that we gleaned from an attempt several years ago at trying to create a program effectiveness evaluation framework for ourselves. So we moved to online grant making over the last couple of years. It really took effect over the last year. I don't know, many of you applied to McKnight? Can I see any hands? Oh, just one or two. So you've experienced our new system. And, you know, we were just, this is kind of one of these inevitable movements in the field. You know, everybody's doing it. Everybody's going to it. We're getting a lot of questions about when are we going online? When are we going online? There's a lot of benefit to it for us in terms of our ability to collect data and to understand things. There's issues with it because the software that's most readily available for most foundations kind of feels like it was done in 1998. You know, and it really is not particularly current, so it's kind of clunky and not the smartest. But basically, our internal processes, how we did grant making, hadn't fundamentally changed in 30 years. I mean, we had basically been handling paper and doing the same thing over and over for many, many, many decades. And that's a lot of patterns, that's a lot of habits, that's a lot of ruts. So when we shifted to online grant making, it's hard to overstate the kind of change that means internally to an organization, because it's personal habits. You know, I mean, people's personal habits of how they review grants, how they keep their own files. Everything is thrown up in the air. Major administrative systems internally have to change. How we kind of work with our grantees, how everybody understands how to apply to us had to change. So there's a lot of change was happening all at once. And, you know, we tried to be as thoughtful as we possibly could in going through it, but we're still adjusting. You know, we've just gone through a couple of rounds of it. And we've gotten a lot of feedback, and we're having kind of a big 6-month evaluation, and there'll probably be a lot of tweaks to what we're doing. But it's, like I said, you know, we're always learning and always adapting and always changing. In the process of doing this, though, we took the opportunity to examine all of our proposal questions, all of our guidelines, and all of our reporting. And one of the things that we had heard over time, particularly about our reporting, McKnight's reporting, was that our grantees, people in the field, didn't think very highly of it. We got that information from one of the Center for Effective Philanthropy surveys. We got it repeatedly from those surveys, and we really have been trying to make our reporting much more useful to everybody. And so we examined everything, and we fundamentally started with the basic question: what do we want to know, and what do we need to know? What do we need to know in terms of reviewing a proposal and making an investment and working with grantees? And then on the reporting end, what do we need to know? What do we want to know? I mean, it's easy. It's really easy to ask for tons of information because it could be interesting. It might be useful. You know, I mean, it's you know, people have it, you know, for all sorts of reasons. But what's really important is to know, to figure out what you need to know to effectively do your work. For you to effectively do your work and for us to effectively do your work. And that's that's a hard thing to get your head around sometimes. So a lot of our reporting, where it used to be kind of elaborate, now it's just 2 or 3 questions, 2 or 3 very simple and direct questions of exactly what we're looking for. And it's freaking some people out because they're kind of going, is this all you want to know? I've got 10 pages of paper. I can send you more. And it's like, no, we just want to know this little bit of stuff because that's what we're really focused on. So we made this change to online grant making, and it had all of these implications and all of these things that we examined and things that we turned over and things that we're still working on. The other thing that was happening at the same time, and this is where my excellent and complex PowerPoint comes in, is an evaluation framework that we've been working on. And several years ago, we had an attempt at creating we were calling it program effectiveness, and it was an attempt at kind of an internal evaluation frame, and it wasn't particularly successful. And the reasons that it wasn't successful was that it was a little bit elaborate. It was really interesting, and it was really good, and it was really engaging. A lot of the staff were kind of turned on by the possible information and things that we could get. But the problem is that it was too elaborate, and we couldn't sustain it. Our board wasn't going to suddenly throw a bunch of evaluation staff at us so that we could have 3 or 4 evaluators on staff to help us maintain this. And there simply wasn't enough time to wedge it into the lives of our program staff. So it had kind of a little brief life and kind of collapsed. So it became my task, kind of one of my immediate tasks when I became the vice president of programs, to really figure something out for the foundation, because it has been an issue, and it has been something that we've been concerned about. So I created an evaluation framework that is guided by the words practical, actionable, and sustainable. Because for us, any of the information that we gather, either evaluative information, benchmark information, however you want to talk about it, it's only useful, it's only worthwhile. No, I say it's only worth doing if you can use it. And that's another simple statement, but it's something that we have to be very clear about internally, because, again, it's so easy to get tons of information. And one of the things that we've learned over time is that it's much better to have a little bit of the right information than a lot of information that you can't use. Because the big thing that you need to do is take the time with it and think about it and reflect on it and use it to improve your work. So that's where we're starting from. So I wanted to create an evaluation framework that was practical, actionable, and sustainable. Practical because, like I say, we have to incorporate it into our daily life. It doesn't feel like an odd appendage. Actionable because we wanted it to be useful. We wanted to have the information as something that we could live with and know what to do with. And sustainable because our other attempts and what we've seen in other foundations is that often there has to be heroic efforts to keep something going. Heroic amounts of staff time, heroic resources, and that wasn't going to happen in our shop. Our shop has always been very lean in terms of the amount of staff that we have. So let me see. Here's the clicker. Okay, this is where it starts. You are here. My graphics here, they're very complex. But the base of this for us is really, again, a fundamental understanding of what our work is, what the work of the foundation is. And again, this is simple, but I find it's really important with our staff and our board to kind of remember what are the basics here. And basically, what McKnight does is invest money in efforts to make changes in the world. Okay? And those investments are made in organizations whose work aligns with our program goals about the changes that we want to see in the world. And those organizations have staff that implement that work. This is all very simple and obvious. So for us, the thing that we always have to remember is that the means by which we fulfill our mission is through other organizations and other people. And it's really easy to forget that when you're at a foundation. You know, somehow you think that we're doing it. We're not doing it. Everybody else that we're working with is doing it. And that's something that we have to, it's a fundamental thing that we have to remember and we talk about a lot in our shop. So, and there's two simple reasons that we give these organizations support. Our missions and goals overlap. You know, there's alignment. And we're set up to legally give them money. You know, again, another simple fact. And the basis for our credibility and authority and relationship with all of these folks is through our grant making. And that's why, for us, our grants and how we do them and how we try to implement them form the basis for our evaluation program. And the basic unit of that is the grant, and the basic beginning of that is what we call the evaluative relationship. And it's with our, it's the relationships that our program staff have with all of you. And it's acknowledging that all of our grantees, all of the people that we work with, exist in this very complex environment of forces and influences and all that kind of stuff. We're just one of those forces and influences. And our relationships with our grantees becomes fundamental to how successful the work is. If the relationship's bad, we're going to have bad information. If the relationship's good, we're going to have a clearer and better understanding of how our missions are aligning and you know, how the work is going. And so this is kind of a fundamental beginning. So one of the things that we work with our program staff with is to remember that with each and every grant, we're looking for goal alignment. And with each and every grant, we have to look at how does this grant help our goals, and also, because we're looking at this alignment, how can we help this group do its work better? Because again, going back to that beginning fundamental, we're dependent on the groups that we're supporting. So their capacity, their ability to be effective is tied to our effectiveness. So that's the beginning. So that's the beginning part of our evaluation frame. The second piece of it is what we call a strategic discussion. We also call that cumulative program evaluation. And one of the things that is sometimes an issue in our business and in our shop is that because we get so many inquiries in, it's easy for us to just get into our responsive mode. So that how we're fulfilling our goals is by kind of looking at what's coming in and choosing, saying, well, this one works, this one doesn't, this one aligns, this one doesn't quite fit. And that's not really, I mean, that doesn't have to be a problem, but the underlying problem with it is that it creates this mindset that our goals are addressed kind of passively or responsively rather than something that we're actively involved in thinking about and creating. And for some of our program staff, for a lot of our program staff, they routinely are thinking about other aspects of the field and kind of looking at what's coming in and what's not coming in, but there was nothing in our institutional life that helped people have that conversation or help people have that thought. So one of the things that we've started over the last couple of years is what we have this annual strategic discussion where we look at all of the work that a program area has done cumulatively. We look at the grants, we look at the convenings, we look at the other activities, we look at who's coming in, who's not coming in, and we really try to look at the group of activities as what we're doing, towards our goals, and then look at what's not there. And again, this is something. This is very simple, but it's the kind of thing. It's the kind of reflection that if you don't take the time to do it, it's not going to happen. And looking at what's not there is one of those things that you have to reflect on. It's not going to show up. I mean, something that's not there doesn't say, "Hi, I'm not there." It is something that you really have to think about proactively. So that's another thing that we've instituted. The third piece of it. And this is where I can plug mncompass.org, is what we call simple metrics. And so we have a couple of things that we're doing internal program reviews and internal program evaluations on to to hone our grant making and our thinking. But what's really useful is to have some external measurements to help gauge what's going on in the world outside so that we can kind of measure our progress against it. And this is where people can sometimes fall into the trap of causality. Like, well, what we're doing, the school readiness rate is going down. Well, is that because we're not funding enough, or because we're funding the wrong things, or because, any number of factors. But what's important for our staff and for your staff to look at any of these metrics and look at the vectors of them. Because the vectors can help inform what you're doing, the vectors inform what we're doing, and it becomes a conversation for us and our staff and the people that we're working with in the field to better understand what's going on and how we can make those adjustments and how we can continue to develop our shared work together. The key to all of these things, and this is why the whole TC MinCompass site is so useful, is how useful it is to our work and how useful it is to the field. Again, I'll say, like I said earlier, research on evaluation and measurement systems really shows that organizations that have just a few simple metrics that they can use and talk about perform better than those that have a ton of data that they struggle with to figure out what to do with. So that's the next thing. So we call this the model is kind of concentric, and so it builds out. And there's one more piece, and then I'll just kind of wrap. And the last piece is what we call external audits, and this is a couple of different things. As I mentioned, we regularly do the Center for Effective Philanthropy grantee surveys. We've done 3 of those. We do them on about a 3-year cycle. They've been extremely useful. We get the information and we take it really, really seriously, and we do a lot of internal changes to our communications, to our guidelines. We sometimes change behavior where that shows up in the survey. We use it in a very practical, very, very direct kind of way. And so for any of you that have answered that and participated in that, we appreciate it because it's very important to us. But it's one of these external things that we use as feedback to figure out what we're doing. The other part of this is that every one of our programs is now on a 5-6-year cycle to have an external evaluation done, where we hire an external firm and they come in and they do an evaluation that really is focusing on the programmatic impacts, the programmatic frame of whatever area that we're looking at. And so over the last couple of years, we've done evaluations on our arts program, on our on our housing program, on our neuroscience program. We're doing one on our funding in Southeast Asia that we do, and we're also doing one in the next couple of years on our Regions and Communities program. So it's just something that is going to be much more routine. But again, it's an external eye on all of these things. And so when they're all put together, I don't know if there's another slide. I think that's it. Yeah, that's how they all kind of work together. So it begins with the relationship and the external, and ends with kind of an external third-party evaluation that helps us. All of these things together help us understand, hopefully better and more, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish together.